Okay, when we left off, the Watsons were all in the car listening to the Ultra Glide that Dad had brought home. Okay, and Mama was listening to the song that Dad had picked for her. We sat in the car for almost 2 hours as everybody got a chance to go in the house to get their favorite records. Even though we had a pretty good record player in the house, it couldn't compare with the sounds that came from the scientifically and mathematically put in speakers that the Brown Bomber had. The Ultra Glide cast a spell on all of the weird Watsons. Byron was always saying that Mama couldn't stand to see anyone having too much fun. But to be fair to her, I have to say that she stopped us from having fun in steps instead of doing it all at once. First, she thought the music was too loud and made us turn it down some. Then, after all us kids got to play 4 songs each, I played Yakety Yak all 4 of my times. She made us get out of the car, and she and Dad played Nat King Cole and Dinah Washington and other mushball singers. Then she said to Dad, "Did you tell him yet?" Oh no! I leaned into the car to get a look at Mama's stomach. This sounded like the way Byron and me found out we were going to get a sister. Everybody's ears jumped up. Something big was going on. Dad wasn't too comfortable with things like this and said, "No, it can wait." "No, it can't." Mama let the last song finish, then said, "Turn it off, Daniel." "Children, in a little bit, Daddy's going to get some vacation time, and we're going to drive to Alabama. Grandma Sands is going to keep Byron for the summer, and if things don't work out, he'll stay there for the next school year." This was too good to be true. A long trip in the Brown Bomber and no Byron for the whole summer, and probably for the whole year, because when it came to Byron, things never worked out. Byron looked at Mama and Dad with his mouth wide open. "We've been telling you, Byron, you've been given warning after warning and chance after chance to straighten up. But instead of improving, you're getting worse. Do I have to remind you of all the things you've done this last year?" Byron still didn't close his mouth. Mama started ticking off the things that Byron called his latest fantastic adventures. "You've cut school so much that Mr. Allen has come here 3 times to see what's wrong with you. You've been lighting fires. You've been taking change out of my purse. You've been in fights. You had that trouble up at Mitchell's Food Fair. And then you had that problem at school setting mouse traps. You set mouse traps in the backyard for the birds. You fell out of that tree when you were trying to see if that poor cat always landed on its feet. You got that conch and you joined that gang. There's just too much, Byron. We can't have all this nonsense going on." I really hoped those weren't the only latest fantastic adventures that Mama knew about. I could list about 100 more. "That's why Grandma Sands is going to look after you for a while. You're about to run us crazy." Mama changed the tone of her voice. "You're going to like Birmingham, Byron. It's a lot different than Flint. There are lots of nice boys your age down there who you can be friends with. There's lots of fishing and hunting that you can do. Things are a lot better there. I love that city. And your grandma tells me it's quiet in our old neighborhood, and she says that the stuff on TV isn't happening around her. It's just like I remember it being. It's safe, it's quiet, and there's no buckhead." Mom and Dad had threatened to send Byron to Grandma Sands about 1,000,000 times, but we never thought it would happen. And this was for 3 good reasons. The first reason was that Alabama was about 2 million miles from Flint, and Byron knew Mama wouldn't let him ride the bus that far alone. He also knew it would be just about impossible for her to sit on a bus with him for the 3 days it took to get there. The second reason was that Mom and Dad were always threatening to do stuff to Byron that everybody knew they wouldn't. Dad had been keeping a countdown on how many more months it would be before they could force him to join the army. But we knew they wouldn't do that. But the biggest reason Byron and Joey and me thought that they would never send him to Alabama was because we had heard so many horrible stories about how strict Grandma Sands was. The thought of living with her was so terrible that your brain would throw it out as soon as it came in. Well, Byron's brain had better get used to it. We all knew by the way they had gotten the bomber ready and by the way Mama's voice sounded that they meant it this time. The big cool baby finally shut his mouth and ran into the house. He slammed the door as hard as he could, and we all heard him say, really clear, the S word. Joey said, ooh. Dad started to go in after him, but Mama said, let him go, Daniel. He better get as much of that nonsense out of his system as he can. Grandma Sands won't be putting up with any of that mess. Chapter 9, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. That Sunday, I got up early. There weren't many cartoons on then, but it was always fun to wake up and not have to worry about going to school. When I got into the living room, I was surprised to see the front door open. I looked outside and saw Dad sitting in the brown bomber. I guess he was listening to records because he had his arm across the seat and was beating his hand up and down like it was a drum. I ran back upstairs to the bedroom and changed out of my pajamas. I peeked out of the bedroom window to make sure Dad hadn't left. He was still in the car, so I ran downstairs and through the front door. I remembered and caught the screen just before it slammed. I tapped on the window and Dad turned and smiled at me, then pointed to the passenger side for me to get in. I ran around the car and climbed in. Hey, Kenny. Hi, Dad. How'd you sleep? Okay, I guess. Go in and get yakety yak and sit with me for a while. That's okay. I'll just listen to what you're playing. We listened to a couple of jive songs, and then I said, Dad, does Byron really have to go to Alabama? Couldn't we just drive down to about Ohio and pretend we're going to leave him just to scare him? Dad looked at me and smiled kind of slow. He reached over and turned the Ultra Glide down a little bit. Kenneth, I know you're going to miss Byron. We all will. But son, there are some things that Byron has to learn, and he's not learning them in Flint. And the things he is learning are things we don't want him to. Do you understand? No. Dad turned the Ultra Glide down a little more. He looked like he was thinking whether or not he should tell me something. He looked straight at me, and even though it was really hard, I looked right back at him. I tried to look real intelligent. And I guess it worked, because finally Dad said, Kenny, we've put a lot of thought into this. I know you've seen on the news what's happening in some parts of the South, right? We had seen the pictures of a bunch of really mad white people with twisted up faces, screaming and giving dirty finger signs to some little Negro kids who were trying to go to school. I had seen the pictures, but I didn't really know how these white people could hate some kids so much. So you remember when we talked about the South and during the Civil Rights Movement, that this is when this is set. So the language that they use is not anything that we would use today. So when I say the word Negro, we don't use that word anymore, but in 1963 they did. I've seen it. I didn't have to tell Dad that I didn't understand it. Well, a lot of the times that's going to be the way. That's going to be the way of the world for you kids. And Byron is getting old enough to have to understand that his time for playing is running out fast. He's got to realize the world doesn't have a lot of jokes waiting for him. He's got to be ready. Dad looked at me again to make sure I was understanding. I nodded. Grandma Sands says it's quiet down where they are, but we think it's time Byron got an idea of the kind of place the world can be, and maybe spending some time down south will help open his eyes. I nodded my head again. Mama and I are very worried because there's so many things that can go wrong to a young person, and Byron seems bound and determined to find every one of them. Now, do you really understand why we're sending Byron to Birmingham? I think so, Dad. Good, because Kenny, we've done all we can, and it seems the temptations are just too much for By here in Flint. So hopefully the slower pace in Alabama will help him by removing some of those temptations. Hopefully he can see that there comes a time to let all of the silliness go. By will be back, maybe at the end of the summer, maybe next year. It's completely in his own hands now. I loved when Dad talked to me like I was grown up. I didn't really understand half the junk he was saying, but it sure did feel good to be talked to like that. It's times like this, when someone is talking to you like you're a grown-up, that you have to be careful not to pick your nose or dig your drawers out your butt. Okay, Dad, thanks. He smiled again, turned the Ultraglide back up, and ran his hand over my head. Some of the time, when you think about being a grown-up, it gets to be kind of scary. I couldn't figure out how Mom and Dad knew how to take care of things. I couldn't figure out how they knew what to do with Byron. Dad, I don't think I'll ever know what to do when I'm grown up. Seems like you and Mama know a lot of things that I can never learn. Seems real scary. I don't think I could ever be as good a parent as you guys. Dad turned the Ultraglide back down. Kenny, do you remember when we used to go on drives and I'd put you in my lap and let you steer the car? I smiled. Yeah? Does that mean I get to do it on the way to Alabama? Well, sure, but that's not what I meant. Do you remember how big and scary the car seemed to be on the first time you were behind the wheel? Dad was right. Even though I knew he was watching everything real close, it still was scary to steer the brown bomber. Well, that's what it's like being a grown-up. At first, it's scary, but then before you realize, with a lot of practice, you have it under control. Hopefully, you'll have lots of time to practice being grown up before you actually have to do it. This was making sense to me. And as far as you being a good parent, don't worry. You'll learn from the mistakes your mother and I make, just like we learned from the mistakes our parents made. I don't have a single doubt that you and Byron and Joey will be much better parents than your mother and I ever were. Dad stopped talking for a second. Besides, some of the time we don't think we've done such a good job. But you're right, Kenneth. It can be scary, and it gets a lot scarier when you see you're responsible for 3 little lives. A lot scarier. I waited to see if Dad was going to talk to me like this anymore, but he turned the music back up. We listened to his junk a little more, and then I said, Dad? Yeah? I've got one more question. He turned the Ultraglide down a little again and gave me his serious look. What do you want to know, Kenny? Is it too late for me to go get yakety yak? Dad laughed and sent me in to get it. I promised to play it only 3 times, though. And we'll stop there.